With the integrative thinking tools, I'm finding that I can say a couple of quick things at the beginning, but then I can set them in motion and get them working, and it's about them as opposed to me. And so I just feel like it's a more honest approach to what's going on in the classroom. We're ready now to start applying the causal model to our Shakespeare plays. So remember, the purpose of the causal model is you want to make your thinking explicit and show your ability to make connections between the key events, the things that take place within the play. So this is a good way for you to map out and show that you understand what you've read, but also to think about some of the relationships within the play, to think about the central events of the play and think about how one causes the other. It's a whole new way of doing things that has allowed me to reapproach how I do things in the classroom without changing everything that I do. With these tools, what I'm seeing happening in the classroom is the students are more engaged, they participate more, and it's less about what my ideas are and more about what their ideas are. Their interpretations, their perspectives, their voices being sort of added to what's happening in the classroom, as opposed to me just in a traditional way, sharing my expertise. It's less about what I know and what I think, and more about what they think. Remember that in each of those ovals or nodes, there should be either an event or a state of being, and each of those nodes should always be the cause of the node that follows it. You've got those arrows or linkages, and they're all pointing towards that central effect. Well, the thing is, it doesn't have to be super technical. That's the thing. Sometimes you guys are used to it's all about the final product, and the teacher's going to look at your final product and say, okay, this is right, oh, but this is wrong. Instead, it's like the process, like the thinking that you guys had to do in order to figure out what to put here, what to put there. What makes somebody want to be king? He's powerful, ambitious, has these desires. Why is that? He's always in his brother's shadow. Now this is cool because now we're getting into the inference stuff, right? Because does it say anything about him being in his brother's shadow in the play? Not anything directly. So what you're doing is that's your speculation. But it takes some thought to do that, right? Students struggle with participating in class discussions because there's that constant sense of, I'm going to get it wrong, or I don't have the right answer, or I'm not going to say the right thing. And because of that sort of, the tyranny of the correct answer, these students kind of stay quiet and they hold back and they don't jump in to a conversation. And I found with some of these tools, what happens is because there's less emphasis on sort of a right answer and more about just articulating, where did that idea come from? Or what made you think that? Or, tell me more about that kind of thinking. Students feel less pressured to get it right, and more, they understand that it's more about just sharing their ideas and explaining where their ideas came from and making their thinking explicit by sort of walking me through the steps of, how did you get to this idea over here? And there's no wrong way for them to explain that. They can just be honest about the steps that they took, and in doing that, they don't have to worry about, oh, I said the wrong thing, or that wasn't the answer the teacher was looking for.
Because he has that patriarchal complex of thinking the male is superior.
That's true. And then if the woman makes him look bad, he feels like less of a man.
Exactly what I'm saying.
It's a hidden, high five, man.
It's a hidden patriarchal
message. Shakespeare wanted us to find this, I think.
The process is more valued with a lot of these tools, and so they're getting more and more comfortable with taking the time to develop their ideas, to go through the steps in a process.
So we should probably put the main, the central effect. So we'd say King Lear dies. So then,
but then the reason is because of Cordelia's death. So there's that wouldn't be part of the central effect.
The conversation was the product, if anything was, and sometimes that's a lot harder to evaluate. And so as a teacher, that made me nervous. Is that we spent 3 days on this. What did we produce? Over time, I've gotten more comfortable with is, while I'm listening to those conversations, I'm gathering material for assessment. I'm gathering evidence of student understanding and student learning that I can then use for descriptive feedback, that I can then use in conversations with students to say, here are some next steps for you. Here's what you can do next. I find that I'm getting a much more authentic information to base that feedback on and to base that assessment on when I'm observing those conversations that come from the students applying these tools.
It's really a lot about perspective, because like even here we looked at the perspectives of characters and then we got into different lenses. So then we kind of looked at an overall concept of what causes what, and kind of divided it up that way.
I think with some of my students, they're so used to the first thing saying, their first response, their first answer is, I don't know. And that comes from that sort of fear of getting it wrong. And the greatest thing I see happening is an increase and a building of student confidence, where they don't need to default to I don't know or I don't get it. They don't need to be reminded, or they're not always reminding themselves or reinforcing with themselves the idea that, oh, I can't do this, or I'm not capable, or I don't understand this. Instead, they recognize by listening to what the other students are saying, they start to see that, oh, I have something to say here. I can participate in this. And as a result, I just see increased confidence. Students are happier. They're glad to be in class because it's a place where they have something to say, as opposed to just being reminded maybe of what they don't know or what they don't understand. Instead, there's a constant emphasis on what they have to say and what their thinking is.
That was one of the reasons
Hamlet
that
kills.
she said she doesn't like him anymore, right?
Did they ever say anything about that?
About
Was
what?
they ever like,
Guys, how do you spell colonius?
Yeah, behind the curtain in the mother's room, when Hamlet stabs her father.
Yeah.
no, but did he ever say anything about Turkey?
Hamlet
Pretty sure
kills.
she did.
The atmosphere that is in the classroom when we're using these tools in terms of sharing ideas and collaborating together, those students who sometimes sat in the back corner start to step forward a little more and they become more comfortable. So I know that the tools are working because students over the course of a semester who I don't hear a lot from are becoming more and more confident to speak up and to share their ideas. And it's because we're working with these tools that value ideas and value challenging conventions and value trying new things. And as a result, students feel a little more open to doing that. And they're given permission to speak up and share their ideas.
So then, wouldn't we branch off from that idea? So we have devastated by Cornelius.
Should we think of like other reasons he died?
So what would cause him to feel devastated?
What the causal model does in terms of getting them to summarize what happens in the play is to really think about why one thing leads to another. At the end of a plot summary, you have sort of a list of events and a list of key interactions. At the end of a causal model, or in the process of creating a causal model, there's often a light bulb that goes off where students start to realize that there are connections that they hadn't seen before. They start to understand how one event way over here in the distance led to another, or is connected to one which on the surface doesn't seem to be similar or connected.
And then why would he feel responsible? Because he banished her from the kingdom.
These, I think, tools have the student at the center and student engagement at their center. And as a result, I find it fits really naturally with that desire, with the Teaching Learning Everywhere's focus on engagement and student engagement. These tools really focus on getting students engaged and participating. They are developing some real skills that are going to serve them in their other classes when they step outside of the school, walking down the street in their real lives. They have a set of tools that are going to make them more confident, more engaged in the world around them.